Welcome everyone to the Over Under Movies podcast, where we take a prominent figure of franchise in the world of filmmaking and ask the simple question: are they overrated or are they underrated? My name is Dylan DeAngelis. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He is the Egon Spengler to my Peter Venkman. This is Mr. Jason Gong. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Dylan.
As I alluded to in the intro there, we are talking about the 1984 film Ghostbusters, film that is turning 40 years old this year, which is absolutely crazy. Ghostbusters: The Frozen Empire, the latest film in this franchise, is coming out this week, and we thought it'd be a perfect time for us to revisit this film. Now, it's very interesting because I feel like we've kind of like pigeonholed ourselves a little bit on this podcast, where we talk a lot about movies we really like, and we haven't really done a ton of episodes where it's movies that like we're like middling on, or films that we don't like. And I think that's why like the overrated underrated idea works really well, because then we can try to like parse like which side of it like makes more sense. However, we rewatched this movie last week, and both of us said that we hadn't seen it since we were like kids, right? You saw when you were younger.
That's right.
And it's a movie that like now watching it as somebody who watches a lot of movies, this is a movie that's like insanely revered. This film was rated the greatest comedy ever made by IGN in 2005.
That's crazy.
The AFI rated it as the 28th best comedy ever. This movie has 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. I was reading Roger Ebert's review on it. He fucking loved this movie. I don't know. I feel like this is a movie you can pick a lot of holes in upon rewatch here. What did you think?
Yeah, I remember we watched this together, like 3 nights ago, and we just didn't have too much to say about it afterwards. We always kind of keep our conversation limited because we want to talk about it on the podcast. But this time we just kind of were like, yeah, that was a movie. It was pretty good.
Yeah, it's weird because I think a lot of the issues I have in the film are like structural issues. I came out of the showing thinking like this almost feels like a sequel to a movie where there's not a lot of setup in general. Like you kind of just get thrown into things a bit. And upon like reevaluation here, I think this is just like a movie that's missing a first act. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think initially when they pitched this, they wanted it to be already established what the Ghostbusters were. They weren't going to show any setup at all. And then they kind of did a lot of back and forth with the script outline until they were like, okay, we have to show at least some of the origin story. So they show like 5, maybe 10 minutes of the Ghostbusters getting set up, what their life was like before they formed the Ghostbusters. And then you're like right into it. Like you're in the montage of the Ghostbusters succeeding in what would be like the second act of most movies. You get to that within like the first, I feel like 30 minutes or so.
Yeah, and I remember like the big thing I remember from our screening was when we got to what we thought was the start of the third act of the film was roughly halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
And it felt like such a weird structure. For anybody that has never seen Ghostbusters before, like we said, it came out in 1984. It's directed by Ivan Reitman. It was written by Dan Akroyd and Harold Ramis. Dan Akroyd originally wrote it for him and John Belushi. John Belushi passed away, so they couldn't do this movie together, unfortunately. Bill Murray was brought on later. And then Ernie Hudson, who is, I don't know what his role is supposed to be in this movie. We could talk about that later, but he plays the fourth Ghostbuster.
Yep.
Winston Zeddemore, and then Sigourney Weaver plays like, I guess, the antagonist. She's like a woman that gets possessed by a demon, and then that's what they fight at the end of the movie.
Yep.
Really interesting film on rewatch here, because like I said, we watch so many movies, and you in your head think of like the typical 3-act structure of a film. The first act is where you set everything up. You introduce us to the world, characters, what's going on, maybe hint a little bit at like what the central conflict of the film is going to be. But that's what the second act is for. The second act is when you start getting into whatever your like main story is. And then you end the second act with like, usually your heroes being at like the bottom, and they got to work their way up to defeat the antagonist. And that's what you do in the third act. This movie just it has no interest whatsoever in the first act. All of the iconic elements that people are familiar with from Ghostbusters, whether it be like the firehouse or the car or the proton packs, like any of the tech that they use, none of it is explained. Like they just have it. It's kind of jarring to like watch it in this movie. Like they don't set anything up.
Yeah, we might be a little like MCU pilled, but I think we're used to like Tony Stark builds his armor in a cave, and then even when he gets his next suit of armor, you see him building that. And to me, that's like cool to see. I like that stuff. To just be like, yeah, these three guys, these kind of schlubby dudes, they're all genius doctors and they can just build this technology that can literally catch ghosts, and they and the fact that they don't show us that, it feels like a missed opportunity to me. But I could see the argument that like maybe people who love this film are really happy that they just get to go right into things.
Yeah, it's very interesting because there's this movie and then there's the franchise. And this is one of those franchises that has been rebooted and reestablished, and it very much like the theme of the franchise refuses to die. They are not interested in this franchise ever dying. It is now in its second reboot. It was rebooted in 2016 by Paul Feig with an all-female cast. We're not going to get into the meta commentary of that film. It was not well regarded. And then they went and did a second reboot with Ivan Reitman's son, Jason Reitman, who is, I guess, most known for his first two films were Thank You for Smoking and Juno, which are two movies I like a lot. And Ghostbusters Afterlife is basically just the ultimate nostalgia movie. It is clearly a film that is made in the post-Stranger Things world. It casts Finn Wolfhard, which is one of the main Stranger Things young actors, and it's just pure nostalgia. It's just, hey, you remember the Ghostbusters? And it's funny because it's a franchise that has evolved into completely missing the point of the original movie, which, you know, I'm a big fan of Red Letter Media. They're like my favorite movie discussion YouTubers. They fucking love this franchise, which makes sense. They're dudes in their 40s, so they were kids when this movie came out. And they talk about all the time that Ghostbusters is a comedy film. It's a comedy. It is a comedy about a bunch of schlubby dudes starting a business and having no idea what they're doing. That's the plot of the film. And it's been co-opted into like this like science fiction like masterpiece or something like that. It's not what it is. It's a comedy film. And so I guess the question I have for you is like, is this a good comedy? Did you find this movie funny?
No, I think that's the weakest point of the movie, is that it's not that funny. For it to be rated #1 by IGN is crazy. There were so many good comedies in the 80s. Even like you and I have talked about like Airplane and how it's not my favorite comedy, but at least Airplane's
hilarious. I love Airplane.
It's got jokes, at least. It's got tons of jokes. The funniest parts of this movie are Bill Murray riffing, which is great. And he is funny. You know, I chuckled a few times while I watched this, but it's just like, as a vehicle for these like SNL alums to really highlight their comedy skills, only one of them gets to be funny, and the rest of the movie is not that funny.
Yeah, the central issue I have is like, there's these 4 Ghostbusters, and there's not enough like unique things about each and every one of them to flesh them out. And this is what happens when you don't have the first act of a movie, is that you don't get to like set up Dan Akroyd's character, and you don't get to set up Harold Ramis's character. Like, you're first introduced to Harold Ramis like in that library scene when they're like evaluating the ghost, you know, event that happens in the cold open, and that's it. Like, he's just there. Like, if you're somebody who's never seen this movie before, you don't know this franchise, you're like, who is this guy? I guess he's one of the Ghostbusters.
Yeah, the characters were all really flat. I guess except for Venkman, Bill Murray's character. I read that Venkman is supposed to be the mouth of the group. Stantz, played by Dan Akroyd, is the heart, and then Spengler, played by Harold Ramis, is supposed to be the brain.
Yeah, he's the tech guy. Yeah.
That basically comes across, but that's it. That's all these characters get to be, is just like the smart one, the heart, and the face of the group.
And what's Ernie Hudson there for? Is there any reason for him to be in this movie?
So the original script, or at least one of the earlier drafts of the script, had a lot more for that character to do. I think he was like an Air Force demolitions expert or something. So he was going to come in and maybe be like the cool badass of the group. And then on the day he got to set, they handed him new pages, and they were like, yeah, we cut your screen time down a lot. Sorry, buddy. I think they've like expressed some apology to him since then. They've tried to give him more to do in sequels and the video games and stuff. But yeah, that character kind of comes in for no real reason.
I'm sure that guy's made tons of money on the Comic-Con circuit.
He has. I'm sure he has.
And then the female lead of the film is Sigourney Weaver, who plays Dana Barrett. Who's also an interesting character. Obviously, Sigourney Weaver, like back in 1984, like most known for the Alien franchise, where she's like an action star, and she's kind of like a damsel in distress a little bit in this film, and she's kind of getting like creeped on by Bill Murray.
Yeah.
Which is a little weird. This might just be like, different time, right? This movie came out 40 years ago. And so like dude creeping on woman and then they romantically get together at the end of the film. That's just like a thing that happened back in those movies, right?
Yeah, a lot of the driving forces of this movie are Bill Murray's character trying to use his job to hit on women. It doesn't necessarily hold up today, but
doesn't hold up well.
Different times, I guess.
And also, didn't Bill Murray have like some sort of like incident recently? I forget what he was working on, but people were saying that like he was making like weird comments like on set to like women.
Yeah, I think you're right. That did happen. He has a little bit of a checkered past in like the tabloids and stuff too. We don't need to get into that.
Yeah, I was reading that after this movie came out, he like kind of got depressed that Ghostbusters did so well. He did a movie called The Razor's Edge that he thought was going to be like his big thing, and that flopped, and everybody loved Ghostbusters, so he just quit acting for a while. That's why Ghostbusters 2 came out in 1989. That's part of the reason why it took 5 years for them to make the sequel, is like Bill Murray quit acting. And they came back for, what movie he came back for in 1988?
No.
It's Scrooged.
Oh,
in 1988. Yeah, this movie got nominated for 2 Oscars.
Okay.
It got nominated for Best Song.
Good.
The Ghostbusters theme by Ray Parker Jr.
Good.
Arguably the best part of this movie.
I think that song really elevates the film, and it kind of like sells it as a comedy too, because it's a funny song.
I'm surprised that there's like a big like climactic moment near the end of the movie that they play some other song instead of the Ghostbusters theme. And I'm like, no, every single time like there's like a music swell, you got to play the Ghostbusters theme. You need to be playing it 5 fucking times in the movie.
So whatever song they played, I know that they had like scored a Ghostbusters theme originally, and then they replaced most instances of that with this version, the version we like. But I think they like one of them, they skipped replacing it. So that might be what you're talking about.
Yeah. The other nomination it got was for Best Visual Effects, and the visual effects in this movie are really good.
Yeah, I think we can agree. Like, I think the whole time we were watching it and something cool happened, we were like, well, how do you think they did this one? Like, most of the time when we're watching a movie, Dylan will be like, this is how they did it, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that seems right. And then this time, we would either be like, I don't know how they did this, or we would disagree on how they did this. For a 1984 film, I think it was pretty incredible.
Yeah, because I mean, 1984 is clearly a lot of practical effects, and it's a lot of like in-camera CGI, I guess you could call it, from the time.
Yeah, there was rotoscoping, there was projections. I think there was a good amount of stop motion, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, the ghosts look really good. Like that if you're making a movie with ghosts, like that's like your number one obstacle you got to get over, is like these characters are like semi-transparent. It's like, how the hell do you do that? Mm-hmm. And it looks great. Mm-hmm. That first time that I think it's Bill Murray sees like the ghost of the woman in the library, like it holds up 40 years later. Yeah, it looks good, which is definitely an achievement. Which you would think that like this movie would have like an insane budget. This movie's made on a $30 million budget, made $295 million at the box office. Absurd. Mm-hmm. So like you would think that they would just like, all right, let's go sequel time, sequel. Which is crazy that it took them 5 years to make Have you seen Ghostbusters 2?
I've never seen it.
I've not seen Ghostbusters 2 either. I can only go off of the reviews. Rotten Tomatoes, it's 55%.
I can't imagine that it's that much worse than this movie. You know what I mean? Like, this movie is okay.
Yeah, it's fun. Like, we were talking about Men in Black last week, and Men in Black and Men in Black 2, there's like a big drop-off in the reviews for those movies, but we talked about being like, I remember those movies being pretty similar.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's like, it's hard to recapture the magic of the first one or something, but I'm sure Ghostbusters 2 is just fine.
So yeah, it's kind of tough to talk about this movie without like getting into the franchise writ large. Mm-hmm. We're doing this podcast because there's literally another Ghostbusters movie coming out, very soon. Why do you think this is a franchise that is kind of like stuck around this long?
Well, I think the premise is unique enough that it's fun and it can evolve. So just having like 3 funny friends and then a 4th friend do a weird shenanigan as they're living is just fun to watch. And I guess it's a good mix of like action and comedy. We talk about how much we like Men in Black last week. This is that for older people in their 40s.
Yeah, it's tough because we were born like a little too late to like latch onto this movie. we're 90s kids, not 80s kids.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it feels like something's like, I guess, like lost in translation a little bit there, like at least on the rewatch.
Yeah, but I do think there's a unique blend of like humor and action, and like you said, a lot of the franchise has dedicated itself to like making the world of Ghostbusters this grand mythological world. So like once you get to that stage in any franchise, then there will be people who are like locked in and will eat up anything. There's still people who are watching every Star Wars show that comes out.
Yeah, it's weird. This is arguably like the most like member berries franchise in existence, because all of the new movies that come out, all they are is references to this original film.
Mm-hmm.
They bring back the same actors. They bring back this, like the car, like the proton packs. They're like, hey, you remember how good that movie was from 40 years ago?
Yeah, I guess you could compare it to like the most recent Halloween reboot, because that was very much built on, we love the first one, we're ignoring everything else, let's make as much of these as we can.
Yeah, I think the two franchises that you could most compare this one to are Halloween and Jurassic Park.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Which are both franchises where they keep, it's like in perpetuity, they're just going to keep rebooting them. Like they make some money, we're going to make these movies fucking forever. And like, we're going to bring back that original cast until they're dead. It's the low-key like a miracle that like they get Bill Murray back in these movies every time.
I feel like he's in some sort of Sisyphusian punishment where he's like, all right, I'm either ready to like just make some fun indie films for a while or retire or die. And somehow the world's like, no, buddy, you got to do another Ghostbusters.
You're doing more Ghostbusters. Because the only one of these original guys that is passed away is Harold Ramis,
mm-hmm.
who I think comes back as like a ghost in the Ghostbusters Afterlife.
I think you're right. I think they did do something.
There's like a ghost Harold Ramis. Not great.
It's always questionable when movies do that.
Yeah, I didn't like it in Rogue One with Peter Cushing. I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah, they do it in The Flash. It's weird.
Yeah, it's really weird. I guess we could talk a little bit about the sequels. Have you seen the female Ghostbusters film?
I was thinking about trying to watch that before we recorded this, but no, I didn't have time. I still want to watch it.
Yeah, so it's a movie that definitely, it got discoursed on the internet because it's a female Ghostbusters. The movie's also not good.
Oh, have you seen it?
I have seen it, yeah. I think I saw it like with my Movie Pass. I think it was like back in those days.
Yeah.
RIP Movie Pass. Well, it still exists, but it sucks now.
Sponsor us.
Yeah. We'll shill anything.
Walk back the sucks.
So it's editor. Cut that out. So what it's Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy. It's all like SNL people.
Yeah.
Again, basically, it's directed by Paul Feig. Chris Hemsworth plays like the receptionist instead of Annie Potts.
Yeah, I mean, again, like on paper, this sounds like it should be good. Was it at least funny?
It was definitely more like it felt like it was SNL people that were in the movie. It felt very improv-y.
It was like a vehicle for them to do gags.
Yeah, they're just riffing. And I remember them talking about it in their press tours, like this is just like shitloads of improv. Like they would just have them like sit at a table and like they turn the cameras on, like they would just talk, like they would just like throw shit back and forth at each other.
Yeah.
And that, who would have guessed? It made a bad movie.
Sometimes that can be great, but most times I think that's not how you should make a movie.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you get Anchorman and then sometimes you get Anchorman 2.
Yeah, that's unfortunate that they got an Anchorman 2 out of this mix. Yeah, I feel like if I saw that movie, I would at least laugh a little bit harder than I did at this one. But yeah, who's to say?
The other issue that 2016 reboot had was that it had a budget of $144 million, which is just too much.
That's crazy. Yeah.
That movie made $230 million at the box office, so they lost some money on that one.
Is that less than what the original made in 1984? Yeah,
so going down the list of the 4 Ghostbusters films that have come out, the first one made $295 on $30 million.
Wow.
The second one made $215 on $40 million, so it made less. And then the reboot made $230 on $144, so that was a dumpster fire.
Crazy.
And then Ghostbusters Afterlife had a budget of $75 million and it made $205. So it's like,
oh, so that made the least, but it at least scaled back its budget a little.
Yeah, so they pulled the budget back a little bit, which is good. But it's a franchise that kind of has like a hard ceiling on it, which kind of makes sense because like who is the fan base for this movie?
At this point, it's dudes in their 40s.
It's dudes in their 40s. Yeah, that's it.
Which, yeah, I mean, if they like revived Men in Black, and again, like we talked about this before, that doesn't have nearly the same reverence. But I think you and I might show up for like a Men in Black movie that came out tomorrow. I don't think the kids would. And I don't really know if they're showing up for this new Ghostbusters. Yeah, I guess we'll see.
I mean, like, do you have any interest in Ghostbusters: The Frozen Empire?
No, I thought the trailer was kind of bad.
Why is Paul Rudd in these movies? Can he not get other work?
Well, I'm sure they're paying him good money to be in these movies. I think he's a good, reliable face.
And then they're trying to do the Stranger Things thing where they cast a bunch of kids in it to try to like get kids interested in it. And well, I mean, we're not gonna have like a whole Stranger Things conversation here, but the whole like 80s like nostalgia thing, I think it's kind of run its course a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. After that first season of Stranger Things, I feel like a ton of properties like popped up to be like, hey, remember the 80s? You know how Gen X is called the forgotten generation? Well, I feel like for a good run of the last 10 years, Hollywood has been like, hey guys, we remember you. And it's been really annoying.
Yeah, it's like Hollywood is aware of what is the generation that is like currently in their 40s or like they're currently at the age where like they have money.
Yeah.
So that they could be like really marketed to. And like ideally those people have kids. So they're like dragging their kids to go see, shout out to Star Wars. I mean, it's basically what Star Wars does nowadays. But yeah, it's an interesting franchise to like look at writ large because like the original movie is just like a basic comedy. And I think it's a fine movie. I forgot to log this on my letterbox. Like, where would you put it? Like, out of 5 stars? You think?
I'm giving it 3, maybe 3.5. I also haven't logged it yet.
Yeah, I think it's like a 3. This is like a bog standard, like average. It's a little like low budget comedy from the 80s that's got some really cool visual effects.
Yeah, I think the best part of the movie, what maybe gets it a 0.5-star bonus for me, is like the 80s dark fantasy like visuals that you see snippets of throughout the film.
Yeah, this movie gets really weird where the main antagonist is not really a ghost as much as it's like a demon.
It's a demon lord from another dimension. So like they'll open a portal to this world and you'll see like this big pyramid and these weird colors and crazy demon hound puppets and stuff like that. Stuff that really doesn't fit the tone of the movie, but fits it just enough that it kind of works. And it looks cool, and it's like stuff that we haven't seen since then. So that stuff I thought was great.
Yeah, and also the choose the form of your destroyer being the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Yeah, that was a good gag. And that's like, at least they set up that iconic iconography. Stay Puft was great.
You said you liked Bill Murray in his deadpan? Like, you thought that was like
he was
good?
He was the only one making jokes in this comedy.
That is true. He was at least trying something.
Yeah. I mean, I chuckled at a few of them. Yeah. Did you not like it at all?
It just didn't do it for me. I think it almost came off like he was checked out of the film.
A little bit, yeah.
He was going full like Dakota Johnson and Madam Web.
Wow, that's quite an insult to this beloved film, but yeah, I kind of agree.
Well, like, because it felt like Dan Akroyd and Harold Ramis were like really invested, and like Bill Murray feels like they just asked their buddy to be in the movie.
That's what happened.
And I was reading like Dan Akroyd was like hoping Bill Murray would show up to set.
Yeah, because he never signed a contract. Yeah,
it's so weird. And again, this is why like movies are so strange. Like the ones that make it and the ones that become like a timeless, like we're talking about this movie 40 years after it came out. And like looking back at it, it's like, wow, this is the one that's like movie executives are like, we need more reboots of this franchise. We need more Ghostbusters. Is it the merchandising, you think? Like the logo is really iconic. The car, the proton packs.
The song
is great.
Yeah, I think that set designs, prop designs, and creature designs were all great. I think that does make it easy to build out at least like merchandise from your franchise. But the way the characters are so flat, I just don't understand how this has kept going for so long and the level of reverence that people have for it.
Yeah, I was also reading some stuff on people, I think, digging way too deep into the message of this film where they're talking about like commentary on like capitalism.
Yeah, how it's a pro-Reaganomics film.
Yeah, this is also like a pro-cop movie. Which is a tough look.
It's an anti-EPA movie.
Anti-EPA. One of the villains of this film is an EPA like inspector who's like, hey, what is like all of this like ghost crap? Like, what is it doing to the environment potentially? which is the correct question to be asking if the Ghostbusters existed in real life. Is this causing some sort of like environmental runoff issue in this like major city?
Yeah, he was right. And like, he's basically a straw man because I guess they hate the EPA. But at one point, his like biggest sin is like, all right, let's shut down this reactor for the ghost containment thing. And they're like, you idiot. Then the ghosts will come out. And he does. And then the ghosts come out. But like, you shouldn't have all those ghosts in the middle of New York City.
Yeah, this reminds me of like South Park making fun of Al Gore.
Yeah.
And being like, oh, look at the environmentalism guy. Like, what a nerd. And then flash forward 40 years later, it's like, that may have aged poorly.
You know what? Maybe Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is like gonna be an apology, like what South Park did to Al Gore recently, where they apologized to him. Maybe this is about global warming. It's
Ghostbusters meets The Day After Tomorrow.
I mean, I think that is kind of the premise of the film. I don't know. Are you gonna see it?
Absolutely not.
No, me neither.
That's not happening.
If it gets great reviews, maybe I'll go, but probably not.
So anyway, before we get into overrated, underrated here, we got to figure out how is this movie objectively rated, which is tough because I think this movie pulls a really high rating.
I think so too. Do you have the Rotten Tomatoes score?
Rotten Tomatoes is 95%, 88%. You know what's the craziest thing that I saw when I was... Rotten Tomatoes is not the be-all, end-all. It's like a snapshot of like opinions of films. But it's funny looking through the Rotten Tomatoes scores of this franchise, because the first one is 95 critic, 88 audience, and then the second one drops to 55, 61. So people don't like it as much. And then the 2016 one, who would have guessed it had bad audience scores? Though it had 74% critic scores.
Okay.
So I think there's a little bit of, not wanting to criticize the all-female movie. Maybe just a tad. Maybe. Putting a little bit of foot on the scale. And then Ghostbusters Afterlife has a 64% critic score, 94% audience score, 30% different. It's like a Zack Snyder movie.
Wow.
So those 40-year-old men that fucking love the Ghostbusters franchise, they're on Rotten Tomatoes and they're letting you know they loved it.
I can't even imagine like making a Rotten Tomatoes account to be a part of the audience score.
Yeah, what has to happen in your life where you become one of those people that
Okay, I will say that I made a Rotten Tomatoes account to give Transformers 2 Revenge of the Fallen half a star because I hate that movie so much. But that's the only reason I ever used Rotten Tomatoes as an audience member.
I'll allow it.
Thanks.
So what do you think? Out of 10?
So I think that those metrics that we're looking at, all those audience members that are actually rating it are the people with like high reverence for it.
Oh yeah, they're full on nostalgia glasses. They're like, show me a proton pack, show me fucking Bill Murray making a dick joke.
That said, like,
and they're like 10 out of 10. This is the best movie I've ever seen.
IGN calling it the greatest comedy of all time in 2005 is crazy. Maybe on our scale of how we think that people rate this, maybe it is like a 9. I'm trying to think of like other people who have come out and said like, I don't like Ghostbusters that much, or like, Ebert gave it a high score.
Yeah, Ebert gave it a 3.5 out of 4 stars.
Yeah,
I think I have the underrated argument here, so I got to haggle a little bit.
Yeah,
can I haggle to 8.5?
We can call it an 8 if you want. It's not like these numbers that we say matter.
No, I don't want to be unfair.
Fine. Yeah, you call it
8.5. Because we're doing objective rating, and you're right. People do love this film.
Yeah,
critics love this film, and it's a film we're still talking about 40 years later. So we'll say 8.5 out of 10. That's going to be our objective rating score. Now, Jason, you have this film that we've been ragging on for however many minutes here. You have the job of arguing that Ghostbusters 1984 is overrated. What is the pitch?
Jeez, what haven't we said already? It's not that funny. Like, can you name a joke in the movie? Can you like recite a line that's really funny?
The one that stood out to me was when they were talking to the mayor and they were making fun of the EPA guy, and I think Dan Akroyd calls him dickless.
Oh yeah,
and then Bill Murray goes, "He's right, sir. This man has no dick."
All right, that was pretty good. But even that, like, I don't feel like that's a commonly quoted line. Yeah, the jokes. First, there just weren't that many jokes is the main thing. There's not many gags. You would think for like sketch comedians that this would be a vehicle for gags. like how Austin Powers is just a vehicle for Mike Myers to show off his comedy chops. That's what you would expect from this movie. And
I would argue the funniest part of this movie is Rick Moranis' character, which we haven't talked about yet.
Oh yeah.
He's kind of like the comedic relief in a comedy movie. There's like a gag that they do where every time he comes out into his office, because he's like a simp for Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah.
And every time he comes out into his apartment's like across the hall from hers, and he comes out and he tries to talk to her to invite her to come to like his parties or whatever. And every single time he locks himself out of his apartment, which is a good gag.
And then, you get some good physical comedy from that because he's a very physical actor. So he's like, oh, let me in, bang, bang, bang. He was pretty good. I still don't think he's that memorable of like a film character. Did you know originally that role was offered to John Candy, R.I.P.?
It's tough.
And he survived past this point.
Oh, okay. He was not dead yet. Good for you, John Candy.
He didn't understand the character, so he said, can I play this character? Can I give him a German accent and have a bunch of dogs? And the producer said, no, there's already too many dogs in the movie. So that's why they went with the other guy.
There's nothing more like actor pilled than being like hearing stories of actors coming on set and being like, I'm going to do the craziest fucking thing ever. Are you cool with that? And then directors going, no.
I mean, it was Sigourney Weaver's idea for her character to get possessed. Originally, she was just going to be like the damsel in distress, love interest, but it was her idea to also become the villain. And they went with that. They said it solved the entire third act for them. So like sometimes you get an actor come in with something that really is firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, well, Sigourney Weaver is also an underrated freak. She notoriously in Alien Resurrection, she pushed really, really hard for Ripley to have sex with an alien, with a xenomorph, and spoilers, that did not happen in the movie, but she really wanted it.
Yeah, she's someone who knows what she wants when she comes onto these sets. I'm getting away from myself. Not that funny, even though we have been laughing at like the two things we think are funny. Most of the movie, not a lot of jokes. You don't even like Bill Murray's jokes, and he's the only one who's making jokes in the film. So that's rough.
You think it's a good New York movie?
Yeah, I mean, it was shot largely on location. They had to move because it got cold out. They moved to Los Angeles, but they were doing a lot of guerrilla filming, which I always admire. You know, just shooting on public spaces without asking anyone. That's kind of how you have to do it if you're a low-budget filmmaker. So it's kind of funny to see these like big budget films doing it too. It's a fine New York movie. They have that thing where like all the New Yorkers come out and they're like, yeah, Ghostbusters, go get them. It reminds me of like Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man, where they're throwing
campy.
Yeah, at Green Goblin. It's a fine New York movie. I don't think that elevates the movie as a movie that much. There's a million good New York movies.
Yeah, we talked about one, Men in Black.
Oh, yeah. I do think this is a better New York movie than, well, that's not necessarily true either. I think Men in Black does a better job showing like the weird side of New York. And this movie kind of just spends a lot of time like dunking on New York institutions and universities and like...
Yeah, the movie starts with like, oh, fuck Columbia University.
It's bizarre. And then, like you said, the structure is pretty weird. It doesn't really follow the 3-act structure the way that we're used to. And it's not like it's really subverting it in a way that is particularly interesting to me. To me, it subverts it in a way that makes a short movie feel like a little bit of a longer movie, which I don't love. And yeah, to me, it's just like a pretty plain movie that for some reason has really struck a chord with the culture and has morphed into this much larger thing. So it's pretty easy to just say that it's overrated.
Yeah, and that's kind of like my underrated argument. I'm kind of like forced into like taking like, you know, a giant step back and looking at the franchise writ large, because you can count on one hand the number of movies that spawned like this level of fandom ever in the history of movies, to the point where not only is there like a giant rampant fan base for this, you know, film franchise, you know, despite how old those people might be nowadays, but they've managed to also get, you know, movie executives on board to like constantly reboot this franchise and reimagine it. And, you know, like we haven't talked much about like the merchandise side of things, but there's been all sorts of like video games and like other sorts of media that they've tried to pull out of the Ghostbusters IP, and doing all of that from this like small little 80s comedy movie from like a bunch of like SNL guys that are just like, I mean, let's be real, they're fucking around at this movie. And It's one of like my favorite things in all of like Hollywood is when you see a movie that kind of like backs into becoming a giant thing unintentionally. There was no like groupthink back in the 80s for them to be like, oh, carefully in a lab, like we're going to construct this like merchandising, monolith here with like the Ghostbusters. No, they put like a ghost dude with like a big slash through it. And they got like an old ass like Cadillac that they just like threw some like random looking tech shit on top of.
Yeah.
And it works. And I will say that you can make the argument that it takes real balls for them to just throw you in the deep end for this movie and being like, we're not setting it up for you. Like, these are the Ghostbusters. And just the name, the Ghostbusters, you kind of like know what the movie is about immediately. It almost doesn't require setup to a certain extent. You have that opening sequence, which I thought was great, with like the books and things moving behind the librarian. And then it's immediately into, they got to go capture the ghost. And that's it. It's a really like basic premise. I do agree that like, I wish they did more with it when it came to like individual sequences or like even setting up like the individual elements. That's actually something that like the 2016 one, which is interesting. The 2016 one does actually follow that like 3-act structure that we were talking about.
Sure.
Like they go into them like developing the tech and things like that, and it's also kind of boring.
Yeah.
So, maybe there's not like a fully right answer, or maybe like this was the right answer. The 1984 one nailed it. But, because this franchise is so, there's so like few other franchises that are similar to it that are able to constantly pump out movies within that same IP. That's really what makes it overrated, especially for people our age, which I'm guessing we don't think of Ghostbusters in the same way that we think of something like Jurassic Park, which is a franchise that got big in the 90s, or like Star Wars, which like a lot, we were kids when the prequels came out in the 90s and the early 2000s. So it's just, for us, like personally, like if we had a guy on here that was like 45, they'd have like a whole different perspective on things.
Yeah, we should have more 45-year-old friends. I think it would help balance out some of our conversations.
We'll see. Red Letter Media, if you're listening, come on the pod.
They'd talk circles around us.
Those guys know a lot of movies. It's crazy. Like their physical library is absurd, which is what we got to start doing. Because like, holy crap, these streaming services, man.
We have a DVD collection in one shelf of a dresser that's currently in our living room.
Yeah, we're very bad movie fans. We got to at least get the Oppenheimer 4K Blu-ray.
Yeah, we should get a shelf and put it in here or something.
Yeah, that would be a really cool backdrop to just have like a whole thing of movies back behind us here for anybody watching on YouTube, obviously.
Send us movies, please.
Yeah, we'll set up a P.O. box and you just send it to us. We're not going to put our actual address here.
Yeah, you got anything else for underrated?
No, that's basically it. We can come to our conclusion here, which we're a little biased, admittedly.
I don't think we're biased. We went into this with an open mind. It's just not for us.
Yeah, I was just disappointed.
Yeah, I was too.
I think is the best way I could put it. It's not like I go into films like always being like, hey, I really want to like this movie, or hey, I really don't want to like this movie. I try to go into it with an open mind, and I came out really underwhelmed.
I remember not getting it when I watched this when I was 5 or 6. And maybe that's too young to watch Ghostbusters, but I don't know that for sure. And I remember I was like, I don't know, I don't really get it. I want to watch the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie again. And so now I watched as an adult. I was like, I'm going to get it this time around. I'm going to see what makes this one of the greatest comedies of all time. And I still don't get it.
Yeah, I would imagine that people that are fans of this movie will probably say something along the lines of like, we just didn't understand it. Or I don't know, the comedy is like...
Leave your comments about why we're wrong.
Yeah, like the comedy is just like going over our heads or something like that.
We're just stupid. Yeah, we're bad at movies.
It's possible. I'm not going to refute it, 100%.
Yeah, so you're coming around. I mean, you believe that this is an overrated film?
Oh, it's definitely overrated. And I don't understand, honestly, like why they keep rebooting this franchise. It doesn't make the level. We talked about it in our Halloween podcast. For anyone that's interested, we did a Halloween episode back in Halloween. Feel free to watch it because Jason has a cowboy accent that entire episode.
I forgot.
Shout out to Cowboy Jason. But that franchise makes like over $500 million usually, like every single movie. This isn't doing those kind of numbers.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like, yeah, this isn't doing huge numbers. It's never in the realm of breaking $1 billion. It doesn't cross the $300 million mark for any of them, right?
No, and the fact that the first movie has still made the most amount of money, and that movie came out 40 years ago. So like with inflation, that's awful. It like the scale is it made so much more.
Yeah, they must be selling a lot of lunchboxes still or something.
I guess so.
Yeah, the iconography is a big part of it, and the name. Before we go, here's a fun fact. Originally, they couldn't use the name Ghostbusters because there was a show or something called Ghostbusters in the 1970s owned by Universal. Universal sold or like leased the rights to the name Ghostbusters to this studio for $500,000 and 1% of the box office profits. This movie did movie accounting to say that $30 million budget and the $300 million returns made zero profit.
I love me some Hollywood accounting.
And you also asked, why do they keep making more of these? Well, I can tell you why I think Jason Reitman decided to do it.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that much, but like, yeah, it's Jason Reitman. Like, his dad directed this movie.
Yeah, so Jason Reitman...
It's a nostalgia trip for him specifically.
He's the son of the director of the original. He had a cameo in this film.
Yeah, he was in Ghostbusters too. Also, he was a cameo in basically all of his dad's movies when he was a kid.
But in this film, he got too scared of the set and ran away. And I think that's haunted him ever since. So he's like, all right, on Ghostbusters 2, I'm going to stay here. I'm not going to run away. And then as an adult, he's like, I'm still so torn up about running away from Ghostbusters. I have to make more Ghostbusters.
Yeah, it's an interesting interesting movie to talk about. My favorite story to talk about with Ghostbusters is when I was a kid, I really wanted to get a cell phone. This was back in like 9th, 10th grade, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, Mom, all my friends are getting cell phones. Why can't I just get a cell phone? And she said, Dylan, who are you going to call? I said, Ghostbusters. And she said, that's pretty funny. All right, we'll get you a phone.
That's hilarious. I think it's crazy that your mom roasted you like that in the first place, but your response was
solid. My mom. She's one to roast people.
Yeah, she's a ball buster, for sure. Shout out to Pam.
Yeah, shout out to Pam, friend of the pod. Anyway, that's going to do it for our discussion on the 1984 Ghostbusters. Make sure you like this podcast, thumbs up, 5 stars, Apple Podcast, all that good stuff. Sub to us on YouTube. Check us out on Patreon. We upload these episodes 24 hours early on Patreon, and you get your name in the end credits of our YouTube videos. So, that's going to do it for myself, for Jason. We'll catch you guys next week on the Over Under Movie Podcast. See you at the movies.
Thanks, guys.
Out.